I'll just introduce myself first. I'm Amelia Draper. I'm the Evaluation and Learning Lead for Changing Futures Nottingham. I've worked in the homelessness sector since 2017, but before that I was a research psychologist with a special interest in neurodivergence. I'm also neurodivergent myself, so I have lived experience of things we're talking about today. And Jeremy? Did everybody hear that?
No, I think I've just readmitted him, Jeremy. So I think he might have dropped out, but I've just readmitted him. So hopefully he's just coming back in.
Some technical issues with the Wi-Fi.
Okay, I was just asking you to introduce yourself, that's all.
Hi everyone, my name's Jeremy Gardner. I'm a team leader at Changing Futures.
Great. So firstly, we'll define a few terms. Neurodiversity is a term that gets used a lot, and often it is used when people actually mean the word neurodivergent. So basically, neurodiversity is a positive word that is meant to recognize and celebrate that everybody's brain is different, and there's no one right or best way for a brain to function. If we think about neurotypical, basically, if you took every single human's brain in the world and then created an average brain out of all of those brains, a neurotypical person's brain would be very similar to that average brain. And it would work in a way that is typical in regards to the norms of that person's society. So people would behave in ways that their society expects them to, without much challenge. Neurodivergent, in contrast, is someone whose brain is significantly different to that average brain, and that can be in many different ways, which means they might have different strengths to neurotypical people, and they also will have different challenges. It's estimated that 1 in 7, so 14% of people in the UK are neurodivergent, although that's likely to be an underestimate as we're learning more about neurodivergence every single day. It's likely to be much higher than that. I think recent predictions have been around 25%. So it's not rare, and it's important to be mindful when you're thinking about neurodivergence that you're thinking about it's going to be people around you, people that you know, family members, colleagues. So always be respectful and curious. Here are a few examples of neurodivergence. It's an umbrella term, so there are many, many different things that come under this umbrella. Developmental neurodivergence just means that it's something you were born with and it stays with you for all of your life. You don't ever recover. It's not a disease, it's just a brain difference that you were born with. And the typical ones are ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette syndrome, and OCD, which can sometimes fall under psychiatric neurodivergence, depending on how much it impacts your everyday life. You could also acquire neurodivergence, and this is through brain injury, which can be through trauma, so blow to the head, a car accident, something like that, or it could be alcohol-induced, it could be a stroke, it could be a brain tumour. All of these things can lead you to have acquired neurodivergence, and by that I mean that your brain has altered in a way that is permanent. Although you may have some recovery, you will have challenges that last you the rest of your life because of this acquired brain injury. There's also chromosomal differences such as Down syndrome, and psychiatric ones such as bipolar and schizophrenia. So we think about psychiatric disorders. It's again, it's a fundamental difference in how your brain is functioning. Nobody kind of recovers from schizophrenia. You just find the best ways to manage your symptoms so that you can have a good quality of life. It's something that your brain has always got, though. So for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to focus on developmental and acquired forms of neurodivergence, simply because we don't have enough time to cover all the nuances of psychiatric neurodivergence and chromosomal conditions don't usually show up in the homeless populations, just because people tend to be better supported. Another little note on language. So language shapes understanding. So how we talk about people can then be interpreted in how people think about people. So public and professionals and those with lived experience can be affected by the languages that we use. So respectful language is always what we strive to do. There is a medical model of neurodivergence, which is more typical, which basically characterizes and diagnoses people with conditions, and this is often very deficit based on impairments, which can be stigmatizing to the individual and completely ignore people's strengths. So if we're thinking about a social model, the idea is that it's not the individual that is disabled, it is society and the way society is set up which causes people to be disabled. So for example, someone might interact perfectly well in a calm, quiet environment, but if you put them into a busy school classroom, they may then really, really struggle, but it's that environment that's causing them to struggle, not their own brain difference. There's also terminology which is changing. So again, often neurodivergence was referred to as a disease or abnormal or a deficit, where now we're moving towards words such as difference or neurodivergence. There's also a specific problem with the terminology around autism. For example, Asperger's was a condition that some people might still relate to having, though they diagnosed a lot of people with Asperger's in the 90s, but this condition or form of autism was actually coined by Hans Asperger's in 1994. He was working in Nazi Germany, and he described people with an autistic psychopathy that have good cognitive potential, and he even described them as having a particular physical appearance that was almost aristocratic. So if you know your history, you probably remembered that the Nazis targeted people with disabilities as part of their racial cleansing regime. And so Asperger's was kind of a way of singling out autistic people who they thought were useful to society from those who they thought were not useful for society. So it's incredibly damaging association with the term Asperger's. So it no longer exists as a diagnosis, but some people who receive that probably don't know its history and may still use it. But it's important for you to understand that it's not an appropriate term anymore. Similarly, high functioning as a term can be damaging, because by calling someone high functioning, you're both ignoring their needs, and you're also, by contrast, categorizing people as low functioning, which again is not a kind way to refer to someone, and also it ignores their strengths. So people think the autistic spectrum looks like this, sort of less autistic to more autistic, but actually it's more like this, a list of different things that might be traits in autism, and people will have different levels of these traits. So some people might really struggle with social differences, but in terms of their sensory profile, they may find they don't have much sensitivity to sensory things, but they still would be considered autistic. And yeah, if you're not sure, ask. Some people prefer to be referred to as an autistic person, or other people don't connect their identity to their diagnosis at all. So it's always best just to ask. Okay. Now we're going to see a video of someone who's experiencing multiple disadvantage. During the time of this interview, Sid was rough sleeping in LA. He also has quite a debilitating drug addiction, and he's had mental health diagnoses. So this is just him talking about how he first got into drugs.
And that's what I wanted to do. I was to make jokes. I was like, yeah, I got on heroin because it's the punk rock thing to do. Now I'm stuck.
You're the black sheep of your family?
Yeah, you can absolutely say that. You can absolutely say that.
Why do you think that is?
Because I like to because I don't know when to say no, I'm good. I don't know when to say no. I don't know when to say no, that's enough. Or no, I don't need to do that, because anything I like, I get addicted to. If I like the way something makes me feel, I'm going to do it to the nth degree. I'm going to keep doing it until he kills me.
Have you been diagnosed as ADHD?
Oh, yeah, fuck. Yeah, that was always like that was the first one was ADHD. Then it was then I hit with schizoaffective and bipolar, which was really more of just a byproduct of budding meth addiction. I was doing my best to keep on the raps with the guys of, I'm in psychosis because I'm hearing voices. And
what is your drug today?
Do what?
What is?
Okay, I'll stop that there. But you can watch the rest of the video when the slides are shared. It's a really insightful interview, so I'd recommend it. So as we hear from Sid there, in his own words, he can't stop doing things even though he knows that taking the drugs is bad for him. And like you said, he thinks that he will keep doing it until it kills him. And one thing that we're going to go on to talk about is executive function, which includes impulse control. So what Sid's describing here is how he doesn't have impulse control when it comes to things that make him feel really, really good, even if he knows that this might lead to his death. And he was severely underweight during the time of this interview. But I just want to reassure you that Sid is okay. He's not dead. There's a follow-up interview with him sort of a year later, and he's doing a lot better. Okay. So this is why it's important for us to think about neurodivergence when in homelessness services or multiple disadvantage services. So these charts, on the left-hand side, it shows the proportion of people in a homelessness setting from a UK research study, and then the other side is estimates of the general population. So the top one is traumatic brain injury, 48% of homeless participants compared to about 1% in the UK, and most of them, 90%, sustained their first traumatic injury before they became homeless. So it's considered a risk factor for homelessness. ADHD, about 64% of homeless populations reporting ADHD, absolutely huge compared to about 15% in the general population. And again, autism, 19%, a lot larger than the general population again. And the important thing to note about ADHD and autism is you're more likely to have multiple complex needs, such as major depression, antisocial behaviour, anxiety disorders, and they're more likely to have been in prison. Autistic people are more likely to rough sleep for longer due to finding hostile environments really challenging. They're more likely to be isolated from friends and family and face more barriers. They have low employment rate, and they're more likely to be a victim of exploitation. So not only are neurodivergent people overrepresented in homeless services, they're also likely to be more vulnerable. Right? And this is just a little graph that shows why people are less likely to be supported with their neurodivergent if they're experiencing multiple disadvantage. So we know that people experiencing multiple disadvantage are way more likely to have had adverse childhood experiences and disrupted education. So this means that neurodevelopmental neurodivergence was less likely to be identified, diagnosed and supported in education. And this is particularly true of girls. It's true of girls anyway, but when we're thinking about adverse childhood experiences, it adds an extra level of girls just not being noticed. If they do find that they are their neurodivergence is noticed by a clinician, often trauma responses or co-occurring substance use and mental health conditions present at the forefront, so it's often missed in adults. And if it's not missed, it is recommended that they go for an autism or ADHD assessment. The need for an educational or a family perspective acts as a barrier to diagnosis, as does refusal to assess with current substance use. And we all know that there's very long waiting lists for these kinds of assessments. You know, up to 2 to 3 years is quite normal now without going through a private healthcare or right to choose route. I'm just going to play you a short audio clip now of speech and language therapist Jessica Renton talking about a phenomenon known as masking.
This is a terminology that is quite new, but it is really widespread use now, I would say, as well, particularly in relation to how a lot of autistic females explain how they may have missed diagnosis at an earlier point in their life. So they're working really, really hard to fit in various social situations and present as neurotypical, hide some of the things that they might find really challenging, hide maybe their sensory sensitivities, hide their communication difficulties, or you know, the things that they might find more challenging, so that other people are not aware of what they're finding challenging. However, what's really, really important is that this will have both short and long-term consequences for that person as well. It takes significant energy to mask, and the recovery to masking can be a significant length of time as well, especially if that's repeated every day. Sometimes people don't know how to if you've spent a day at work and you are masking, what they need to do when they get home to recover that energy. They don't have that strategy in place. So sometimes it's about thinking about that with a person. But on a long-term basis, it can lead to increased risk of engaging in deliberate self-harm, in potential sort of suicide attempts, real difficulties with self-regulation. It can lead to absolutely lead to burnout as well. So it's I think we are understanding all the time more and more about masking, but it's really important that we hold in place what the consequences of that are. It's also really important to hold in mind that because people can mask, it stands that we then overestimate what they can do without the additional support or structures in place to facilitate things. So we can keep expecting the same thing from that person, and we're adding to the load that they need to do. Whereas we could actually put a reasonable adjustment in place and making the whole thing a lot easier.
Okay, so hopefully that gave you a little insight into masking, which is more common in girls. Okay, we don't have the time to go over every single different kind of neurodivergence, and every individual who's neurodivergent will be different in what they struggle with and what they do really, really well. So we basically just categorized the three areas of differences that are common in a lot of different kinds of neurodivergence. So the first one is communication differences, which could be speech, but it could also be eye contact, body language, missing social cues, or missing the nuance, or being unable to read between the lines. It also could involve different facial expressions or difficulty interpreting facial expressions. Sensory differences, this could be an over or under sensitivity to different things such as movement, light, sounds, texture, and people can be oversensitive to some things and undersensitive to others within the same individual. So there's a lot of variability. It's not like in bright lights and loud noises. There's a lot of different things that you can be sensitive to. And the last one is executive functioning differences, which we will go into a lot of detail on these a bit later on. So here again is another clip from Jess just talking about communication differences.
So I know that one of the people that we've worked with, if he was asked a question and he was processing it, his facial expression looked really, really angry. So people at that point would walk away. They'd leave because they thought that he was getting really angry about something. When that was then discussed with his mum, she reported that actually that face is his processing face. It's really important because he's about to share something that's really, really valuable with you. So if you stick it out, he's not a risk to you, but he's about to tell you something really important. And had we not had that bit of information for that person, we would have been missing that opportunity to the whole way that he could be. So I know that.
So what she's describing there is an individual who was autistic. He had a difference in his facial expression, which led people to stop supporting him because they thought he was aggressive, when actually he was just trying to process and think about what had been asked of him. Okay, this is a case study from Jeremy.
Yeah, so one of the things I thought would be useful to share with people is basically what this can look like with concrete examples rather than just in the abstract. Excuse me, because like Amelia mentioned already, oftentimes the people who are in homelessness services for the longest period of time are people who are neurodivergent. So the obvious thing to ask is, well, why is that? And often it's because of either communication differences or sensory issues or issues with executive functioning. So it's useful to sort of see what that can look like and how people, say with communication differences, try to access services. So someone I want to discuss with you guys is a gentleman that we're going to call Alan. So this is for several months. First time the street outreach team met Alan, the most they could get out of him was a grunt. Couldn't get a name, anything. I think it took 3 months to get his first name. And I think a couple months later, they eventually got his surname. So obviously that in and of itself was this challenge. Something that I found quite interesting when I was trawling back through the notes about his situation is the longest conversation I think they ever had with him in those first initial months was with his back turned to the outreach team. And the thing that I was reflecting on with that is that it's very likely that he found making eye contact so difficult and speaking with the team so difficult that it was doing that was more challenging than staying stuck in a situation where he was rough sleeping. So eventually the street outreach team realized that Alan was spending most of his time at the library. They realized he was kind of spending his time playing games online, and they were kind of able to talk to him about his interests and some other things. For the longest period of time, he just kept declining supported housing. He didn't want to go to hostels. And a large part of the reason why he didn't want to go to hostels was because of sensory needs. If you've ever been in a hostel, they can be loud. They can be very overwhelming places. And for him, he knew what that would be like. And he knew that those weren't necessarily safe spaces for him. But it's not necessarily that he didn't want to be accommodated, which is something that I think we can sometimes fall into a trap with. So during the Everyone In scheme, so if people remember that was during the COVID pandemic, there was money made available for rough sleepers to go into hotels. Alan went in to the hotel during Everyone In, and he actually moved from that hotel into private rented accommodation. So I think it's the thing that's important to reflect on that is it's not that Alan wasn't bothered with housing or that he didn't want to be housed. It's not just that he didn't want to go through the hoops, it's that he couldn't go through the processes that services were expecting him to go through in order to access housing, or the options he was being presented with weren't suitable for him. But when there were kind of adjustments made, that everything kind of clicked into place.
Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, although I did say that we're not going to go into diagnoses, I just wanted to include a couple of slides on PDA because it's not something that's known about very widely, and it's something that's definitely relevant to people that have been supported in rough sleeping and homelessness settings. So PDA stands for pathological demand avoidance, although a lot of people who have PDA or parents of children who have PDA are pushing for that to be changed because it's very deficit based and doesn't quite understand the origins of what PDA actually is. So pervasive drive for autonomy has been put forward by some people as a preferred term. But PDA was first described in the 1980s, but it never got included in the DSM, which is the diagnostic manual. So you can't be diagnosed with PDA. It's described as a behavioural profile. It's often present with autism, and some people describe it as a certain profile of autism, but you can have it without being autistic. It's often co-occurs with oppositional defiance disorder and ADHD, but again, it can be present without any of these. Basically, what PDA is an overactive nervous system response. So it's a fight, flight, fawn, or freeze to any perceived loss of autonomy or power. So any kind of demand that's put on somebody is perceived as a loss of autonomy or power, and the behaviour can then be viewed as an attempt to rebalance the scales or regain control. But all of this is unconscious because it's an overactive threat response, basically. So behaviour can include resisting or avoiding ordinary demands of life. It can be using social strategies as a form of resistance. For example, distraction, giving excuses, giving reasonable responses to why you can't or do something. And sometimes behaviour can also include aggression to really rebalance that and get your autonomy back. When a demand is made on someone with PDA, it makes it almost impossible for them to do it. Which is very, very difficult for people to understand who don't have PDA or haven't lived alongside someone with PDA. And you should always remember it's a can't, not a won't. It's not that they won't do it, it's that once that demand has been made, their nervous system is doing everything it can to try and regain their power, which means they can't do the thing that you've asked them to do, even if they know it's really important to do, or even if they know they'd enjoy to do it. Anxiety and burnout is really common with people who experience PDA, often leading to complete shutdown. And often this is more true with children, but we can think of it with adults as well. But behavioural strategies, such as offering a reward for completing a task or praising good behaviour, can actually make it worse rather than improve it. So there are a few things you can do that can help people with PDA. Firstly, building trust, because you're less likely to trigger that threat response if they trust you. Using indirect language, it's kind of like a cheats code. Rather than making a demand on someone, make a suggestion and don't direct it at them, to kind of like gently nudge them in the right direction rather than put the demand on. Reducing demands, that just helps, because if there's no demand, then there's no response to it. And giving the individual as much control as possible to help them feel regulated. Offering choice can help with that. If you push, pressure, make threats, or highlight consequences, it can actually make the PDA worse and make it much more likely they will do the thing that you want them to do. And it doesn't have to be external. These can be internal demands as well. People with PDA struggle to do things that they want to do, that they know they want to do, without any external prompting, as well as being prompted by the individual. And I've included a couple of links here that you can look at in your own time that will explain more about it. It's a very nuanced phenomenon. And if you've met someone with PDA and you understand what PDA is, suddenly their behaviour makes a lot more sense. So I think Jeremy's got some examples for us here.
Yeah, so it should come as a shock to no one that, well, at least in my opinion, the two most entrenched rough sleepers in Nottingham City at the moment, I strongly suspect, have aspects of PDA. And I think that it can kind of, this is not a technical classification at all, but I think it can present itself in either loud ways or quiet ways. So Bradley's very much the loud way. So at times that I've sort of been involved in his sort of support, there have been times he's become deeply unwell from his health that there was genuine concerns that he was going to die if he didn't access healthcare treatment, and he still refused to go to hospital to get that treatment. And thankfully he's alive, but that there was a genuine risk there that he wasn't going to make it out of that. And we even, at the time, we were looking at things like capacity assessments, and he was deemed to have full capacity. He was not deeply unwell. He was just pushed to, when I've reflected back on that, I think he was just pushing back around that because of how much of an overwhelming demand. Basically, anytime anyone saw him, he was being told the same thing: you need to go and do this, you need to go and do this, and he just kind of locked down and wouldn't. This gentleman's also been offered multiple different sort of housing first or next steps accommodation style properties, but each time that's happened, he's either never gone or he's just handed back the keys and refused to stay. He's refusing, at least last time I heard, he's refusing to go to any sort of hostels. He wants to stay out on the streets, is what he's told people before. And he can be quite sort of agitated and pushing people away, tells people to fuck off, to leave him alone, get away from him. And even though there's no official diagnosis, there's one kind of in his or professional suspects that it's very likely that he has ADHD. Thank you. And then this other gentleman is the second most cited rough sleeper in Nottingham. Kind of, I think, experiences pathological demand avoidance in the quiet way. So he's extremely polite, so he never tells anyone to fuck off, as far as I'm aware. But instead of sort of that kind of more aggressive to assertive presentation, when frontline staff approach him, he just says he's fine. And he's aware of what he could do to access housing. He just will say he's fine as he is. He's not claiming any benefits, and he doesn't want to claim any benefits. He doesn't have a bank account, and he doesn't want to have a bank account. And he's not interested in accessing housing. So even though he's a lot more sort of polite and towards people, it's often more challenging if someone's saying that they're absolutely fine, because you don't quite know how to approach that, really. And even though he doesn't have a diagnosis, at least some of the staff I've spoken to, it's strongly suspect he's likely autistic. Not just because of the pathological demand avoidance, it's also like very narrow ranges of interests and things like that. But interestingly as well, I think a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that he may be autistic, or that his presentation could be that.
Thanks, Jeremy. I think it's really useful to see these clear examples of how demand avoidance can affect people. Okay, so this is a slide that tells you about drop curve adjustments. So by drop curve adjustments, we mean changes to practice that support everybody, but will particularly support neurodivergent individuals. And you don't need to know someone is neurodivergent to make changes to how you work, because these changes will benefit everyone that you work with. So first, we've got calm spaces, so a space away from the hustle and the bustle of whatever else is going on, soft lighting, comfortable seating. People like beanbag chairs, but that's not a requirement, and quiet, away from a lot of sensory input. So these have been introduced in a couple of hostels in Nottingham, and they've had a really good response to having just calm spaces in a homelessness hostel that people can escape to. Communication support is also really important, and this could just be asking, understanding people's preferences, making sure you use plain language, no idioms, no sarcasm, and then checking understanding. So don't check understanding by saying, do you understand? Because the easiest thing for someone to say is yes, and then even if they don't. So it's best to ask people to repeat the main points or give you a summary of what they understood, or get them to tell you what they think the next steps or actions are, and then you can revisit it if anything was unclear. Also just reducing environmental distractions. It's very difficult to take anything in if there's a lot going on around you. You can also support task initiation and memory with prompts, reminders, text messages, calendars, visual aids. Trauma-informed care supports everybody. It should be something that is ingrained in any homelessness practice or mental health service, or all practices really where you're coming in contact with people. Incorporating movement can also help. So fidget toys, movement breaks. Ask if someone preferred to go for a walk or sit during the consultation, or if you can't go for a walk, if you need that private space, then just let them know it's okay to stand or pace if that's how they feel more comfortable. And to be more inclusive of dyslexia, if you avoid black on white text, it's much easier for dyslexic people to read text that's not very high contrast. So black on white or white on black is the highest contrast you can have. So if you just change the background or print on coloured paper like a light green or a light blue or a light red, it just really helps dyslexic people to read that clearer. So this is just an example of a communication support tool that we've been using. And basically you present the person with a list of things that might help them, and they can just circle the ones that are relevant to them. And then you can use that to create a bespoke document or communication plan just for that individual that can be shared with everyone that they work with their consent. And here's another clip that's just outlines why communication support is important.
Unfortunately, an awful lot of the people that Vic and I work with or support have also really struggled to ask for help or say, do you know what, I didn't get that. It might be that through schooling and various other and employment and places like that, that they have been shamed out of asking when they need help. So they don't ask for help anymore because their experience of when they've done that has been negative. It's been kind of disregarded or kind of, well, you should know, or you should have been listening, etc. So people don't initiate sort of asking for help.
So yeah, I think it just highlights the need that you should be presenting your supports to everybody rather than relying on the individual to ask for help or tell you that they don't understand things because they've had a lifetime of experiences of being made to feel stupid or made to feel like they're not someone who listens by the people around them. And again, this is an example. It's not real. We have made these cards for people, but all the details have been changed on this to protect their anonymity. But you can take a communication tool like that and create a bespoke card for the person that they can then share with professionals to explain their behaviour and also to let the professional know things that would help them. So in this section, we're going to talk a bit about the brain and a bit about executive function in the context of the brain. And I'm going to oversimplify everything. I'm going to not use brain words. So I know a lot of people are aware of different parts of the brain, but just for simplicity's sake, we're just going to refer to this outer part of the brain, the wiggly bit, as the thinking brain. So that's the cerebral cortex, but we're going to refer to all of that as the thinking brain. And then as you can see in the animation, it opens up, and then in the middle, right deep down, is this protected structure that we're going to refer to as the survival brain. And the bottom part of that protected structure connects directly onto your spinal column. So it receives input from your body very quickly, and it also can send signals to your body very, very quickly. So the outer bit, the cortex, thinking brain, inner bit, connected directly to your survival, directly to your spinal column, is your survival brain. I hope everyone can see the animation. If I'm in person, I would have had a model brain show you, but this will have to do. Okay. So if we think about the thinking brain to start off with, everything that you are aware of doing takes part in this thinking brain. So it has several distinct areas, and it's responsible for things like your language, your speech, you're making decisions, planning, interpreting sensory information. So knowing what you're seeing, what you're smelling, what you're tasting. It also is important for social interactions, and reading, writing, concentration, things like that. So a lot of the time you are aware of things going on in your thinking brain, and it's controlling what you're doing and what you're saying and what you're feeling. But having said that, you don't need any of those things to be able to survive. You can survive without any of that. Your quality of life might not be very good, but you can survive. And that's because deep inside, you have a set of structures that are way more important for your survival. Some people refer to this as the lizard brain, but I don't really like that because we're not lizards. But the idea is that you can do all kinds of behavior without needing to have that over conscious sentient thinking part of your brain. So your survival brain is way more important for automatic reactive behavior. It's also important for learning from experiences. So your episodic memory is stored in your survival brain because if something happens that's so important, you put it in your episodic memory, it's probably important for your survival, either in terms of it being a strong emotional response, or it being something that generated fear or a huge threat to your survival. So that will be stored in that survival brain, because if it happens again, you need to really quickly recognize that you've been in this situation before and know how to respond to it. So it's part of learning from experiences, which is particularly relevant when we think about people who've had a traumatic history. This survival brain is also constantly monitoring your environment. It receives input from all of your senses, and it uses that input to monitor the environment and to sense threat. So even though you're not conscious of it, it is constantly sensing threats in your environment and making you react based on those threats. So it can increase your heart rate, it controls your heart rate, it can increase your heart rate, it can increase your breathing, preparing you to fight. It can flood your body with stress hormones, with cortisol, preparing you to have a fight with something without you even being aware that the threat is there yet. You can have this big sense of dread in your stomach that I'm sure people have experienced before without knowing what it is. And that sense of dread in your stomach is your survival brain preparing your body for a fight because it has sensed a threat. So if I give you a couple of examples that hopefully illustrate the different types of situations when you're using your thinking versus your survival brain. So if you are musical, you may be learning a new piece of music on the piano. For this, you're using your thinking brain. You're looking at the notes on the page. You're interpreting that into what keys you need to press on the keyboard, and you're hearing the sensory input of that music and making adjustments based on that whilst you learn this piece. So you're controlling your hands, and you're listening, and you're looking at the notes. If now your pet cat jumps on top of the piano and knocks a heavy book or a heavy vase off the top of your piano and it's falling, crashing down towards your fingers, you're going to do this. You're going to pull your hands back really quickly so you don't get hurt. And that movement was controlled by your survival brain, and it would have been a hell of a lot quicker than the time it took you to process that the vase was falling. So in that situation, both parts of your brain controlled your movement in different scenarios. One, so that you could play this lovely piece of music, and the survival brain, so you didn't hurt your hands from the crashing vase. There's some interesting bits of the survival brain that I just want to touch on. There is a part of this brain, and all that it does is recognize faces. It interprets faces. They've done lots of psychological MRI-based experiments to find this place that just recognizes faces. And the reason for this is thought to be that understanding another human's expression is incredibly important for our survival, because throughout all of human evolution, the biggest threat to humans has been other humans. And so you need to be able to interpret really quickly by looking at someone's face. First, you need to be able to know it's a human. And secondly, you need to know if that human is a threat to you. And if you imagine if this part of your brain is overactive for any kind of reason, then you will interpret more facial expressions as aggressive than you would without it. So imagine being in a busy waiting room, you have an overactive facial area in your survival brain. Suddenly everyone around you is a threat. Everyone is looking at you funny. Everyone feels like they may attack you at any moment, and you've got to use all of your resources on stopping yourself from reacting in a fight, flight, fawn, or flop manner. Let me give you one more example. So in the thinking brain, there's an area, this blue bit at the back, called the visual cortex. And all that does is interpret what you're seeing. So everything that you're seeing comes in through your eyes and gets interpreted in this visual cortex. There have been some case studies of people who have had a stroke that has completely wiped out this part of the brain, and they are functionally blind. You ask them what they can see, and they say, I can't see anything. You can ask them, what color is this? They can't tell you. You can ask them, can you read this? They say, no, I can't see. However, if you throw an object at their head, and researchers did this, ethically or not, they threw stuff at them and they would duck and miss it every single time. And that's because even though they couldn't see the object flying towards their face, the visual information was still getting to their survival brain, and the survival brain was forcing them to react even though they were unaware of the object. So it just shows how it can control your behavior in important ways to keep you safe. And that's all this part of the brain is trying to do. Whether it's sometimes overzealous, its intention is always just to help you survive. Okay, so now we're going to go on to why is that important for executive function? Well, executive function is all thinking brain. I've circled here the frontal lobe. Executive function, actually, all of these things take place in the very front bit called the prefrontal cortex. Don't need to remember that. All you need to know is very front bit of the brain. It's actually around here. And if you can see on me, I don't know if you can see me, but I'm pointing the very top bit of my forehead. It's just behind there, and that part is very, very vulnerable to injury. If you get a blow to the front of your head, you're likely to injure it. If you get a blow to the back of your head, you're likely to injure it as well, because if you're hit at the back of the head, the brain kind of zooms forward and smashes itself against the hard bit of skull that you have just here. So it's very vulnerable to getting injured, which is why executive function difficulties are so common in anyone who's had a traumatic brain injury. So what does it do? So this little prefrontal cortex bit is involved in a huge set of skills, including working memory, which is the memory that you need to be able to complete tasks. So if I said to you, can you make me a coffee? I want it white with 2 sugars, you would then hold that information in your working memory to complete the task of making me a coffee. It's also involved in self-monitoring, so understanding if you're hungry, if you're thirsty, if you'll need the toilet, that kind of thing. It is involved in planning and prioritizing, so knowing what order to do things in task initiation, so beginning tasks, so getting started on things and being motivated to get started on things. It also is involved in organizing yourself and your thoughts, and again, what you're going to do, what actions you're going to complete, and crucially, it's involved in impulse control, so in controlling those impulses that you have and controlling your emotions. And all of this stuff is important for controlling the behavior of your survival brain. So when we talk about executive dysfunction, basically what we mean is that some of these things or all of these things on the wheel are not working as they should be, or not working to their full ability. So I've given some examples of what that might look like. So if you've got problems with working memory, you might have an inability to follow multi-step instructions. You can't keep those things in your head. You might forget what was just said or forget what you were doing mid-task. Self-monitoring, you may not notice the signals that come to your brain to meet your needs. You might not notice you're hungry. You might not notice you're thirsty. You might not notice you need the toilet until these things have gotten to a point that it's a very extreme urgent need. Planning, prioritize, you can focus on too much on one thing. You can be stuck, unable to choose what to do, or unable to follow the steps to complete a task in the right order. You might have an inability to start a task, particularly if it's boring or difficult or has no immediate reward to yourself or benefit you. It's really hard to self-motivate. For example, if we think about going to the local authority and filling in a homelessness application, that has no immediate reward. It might have a long-term reward, but it won't have an immediate reward, which might make it really difficult to initiate going to do that. Organisation, it's really common for people to lose things a lot, even really important things, or they'd be distracted or not able to concentrate on what's being done or said. Impulse control, it could look like acting quickly without thinking, or seeking quick rewards, or going straight to safety behaviours such as fight or flight when the situation would normally cause for that kind of response, or acting in socially inappropriate ways. So we all have thoughts to do things that aren't appropriate, and the difference is if you've got poor impulse control, you might actually do those things rather than just thinking them. And emotional control, having strong emotional reactions that aren't appropriate to the situation. So it's important when we think about emotional control to understand that the emotion underlying that is valid. If someone is really, really upset, it's a valid emotion. It's just the response is larger than or disproportionate to the circumstances. This can also involve having a very strong negative reaction to any perceived criticism. So, for example, there was someone with a traumatic brain injury who could not stop crying. It was something that was really debilitating to them. They would just cry constantly. And it wasn't that they weren't upset, it was that was disproportionate response to the situation they were in. And then finally, flexible thinking. So this is important to be able to solve problems. And if you struggle with this, you might have an inability to see things from a different point of view, or an inability to try different strategies to solve a problem. And this can also lead to inflexible thinking when it comes to your ideas about people. If you get a certain idea about somebody, or a certain idea about a certain thing or object, and it can be very, very difficult to change your idea of that person or of that thing. So again, Jeremy's got a couple of examples here.
Yeah, I could have spoken to any one of them, but I thought it was interesting, or at least I wanted to share a bit about a gentleman with quite poor impulse control. So Fred I can't remember if he has a formal diagnosis of ADHD, but again, strongly suspected. One of the things that can be a challenge with people with ADHD is you can often be more prone to risk-taking behavior. When you are more prone to risk-taking behavior, you are also more prone to receiving acquired brain injuries. He was also quite a heavy drinker, so by the time I was working with him, a fairly significant cognitive impairment due to brain injury as well as ADHD, and that is a dangerous cocktail for impulse control. So, and I know I said on this slide that he doesn't like being bored. That's me being a little bit glib. But some of the things that he's done, which are a bit funnier rather than some of the more serious stuff, is he's done things like ride down the hostel stairs that he was staying in completely naked on his bike. He's stolen a mannequin from a shop and danced in the street with it. He's stolen a giant sex toy from a shop before. He's also stolen a stormtrooper that was about 4 foot high. A lot of things that have no real inherent value. He's also done things like, which are not as funny. He's ran up and licked people's faces or just at a red light. It's also unfortunately sexually assaulted people. I think sometimes partly through poor impulse control. And it's effectively the thing that strikes me is that all of us, I think, sometimes can have like thoughts or random ideas, and then we go, "Nah, I probably shouldn't do that." But with Fred, by the time the thoughts enters his head, he's halfway through doing the thing. And yeah, that obviously can lead to quite serious issues. So again, it can lead to significant offenses. It can lead to exclusions from accommodation settings. And the more that these things happen, then the harder it can then be for people to access help, because they wind up having this huge risk history that kind of follows them around, which they weren't necessarily able to stop themselves from doing.
Amelia, you're muted.
Thanks, Justine. All I said on this slide was, can also lead to him having contact with the police, which isn't a positive either, since a lot of his impulsive behaviour is illegal.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. So that's the thing as well, is he wasn't any kind of threat to most of the professionals he worked with. But yeah, anytime he would have contact with the police, it would often end in quite dramatic arrests.
Yeah, although some of the things sound comical, it's really debilitating for him in terms of what he goes through in life. So here are some things that reasons why people might experience executive dysfunction regularly. Everyone experiences it. Sometimes, we've all gone into a room and forgotten why we're there. That's an executive dysfunction. But if it's happening on a regular basis, here are some reasons for that. So traumatic brain injury, as we've talked about, the prefrontal cortex really prone to injury from if you've had a blow to the head or a traffic accident or something like that. Other reasons, ADHD, trauma can also cause it, schizophrenia, bipolar, autism, OCD, Tourette syndrome, and Alzheimer's. There are other things, but these are some of the top reasons why someone might regularly have executive dysfunction. Okay, before we go on to that, just want to talk a little bit more about the brain differences. So we've talked about how executive function is all organized in the prefrontal cortex, but this has a strong connection to the survival parts of the brain. And basically what is happening is it can exhibit control over those survival impulses. So when your survival brain is scanning the environment for a threat, it will sense a threat, and then it's the job of your executive function skills to decide what to do with that, whether to how to respond, and whether you need to go into full-blown fight, flight, fight mode. If there is something disrupting the interaction between these two brain areas, or the survival brain is overactive, which is happening in a lot of the examples that we gave of executive dysfunction, your survival brain in some way is overactive. It's constantly sending signals to your thinking brain, telling it that there is a threat and that you need to respond to that. Sometimes it's saying you need to move, you need to move, you need to move. Sometimes it's saying it's making your heart rate go faster, it's making your muscles go tense, and all the while you are really struggling to control not responding to that threat signal to the extent where you stop being able to control your behavior. Like we were talking about PDA earlier, it's a can't, not a won't. So if you're constantly saying, this human here is a threat, they're trying to control you, and your survival brain is telling you that they're trying to control you, you need to make sure they don't control you because it's important for your survival, then you're going to use all of the resources you have in your thinking brain to stop yourself responding aggressively towards that individual. Which is where the social strategies of PDA come in, the avoidance of it. And then sometimes people just do respond aggressively, as Jeremy gave the example of the person who regularly shouted expletives at outreach staff because they just would respond in that sort of, this will make them go away, I'll protect myself way. So now we're going to do a bit of Mentimeter. I will put let me exit this presentation. I will put the link in the chat as well. So that everybody can use it. I'm guessing people can see this screen now. Copy. Okay, there we go. It's in the chat and there's a QR if you've got your phone out. So the question is, what do you think would make executive dysfunction worse? And we'll just give a few minutes and then I'll see what you guys came up with. Thanks, everybody. Can everyone see the Mentimeter on my screen, or am I still sharing slides? Justine, what can you see?
I could see the Mentimeter.
Great, that's what I wanted to happen. Okay, this is looking great. I love that the biggest ones are stress, tiredness, and substances. Also hormones. It's really good that people have recognized that. Too many previous demands, yeah. Tiredness, fatigue, yeah. Rough sleeping, yeah. If you're rough sleeping, you're not getting enough sleep. You're always in a poor environment and you're surrounded by threats. So, yeah. perceived threat, yeah. Trauma. Hunger, definitely. It's so hard to concentrate when we're hungry. People, I like that. Just people, yeah. It's easier to be by yourself. Okay. Right, I'll go back to the slides now. Thanks, everybody. There's a second question in a minute. Not that. There we go. So I think you all got most of these, plus extra ones that went on the slide. So things that can make it worse include stress, feeling unsafe or powerless. I think that was included in a lot of people's answers. Exhaustion, so any kind of tiredness, exhaustion, burnout, pain. It's very, very hard to focus on anything else when you're in pain because your survival brain will be going, that's a problem, you're in pain, you need to pay attention to the pain, you need to solve the pain while you're in pain all the time, which will make it very difficult to use any of your other executive functioning skills. Alcohol makes executive function a lot worse. So do a lot of drugs. There are some drugs that can improve it to a certain degree, but most recreational drugs will make your executive functioning a lot worse. Hormonal changes, I saw hormones were there, really good that people have that knowledge. So one clear example is during the menopause, or often the huge hormonal changes create poor executive function. Brain fog, as it's often called, but it can also happen during pregnancy or even during the normal cycle as well. Poor nutrition, people mentioned that as well. Being hungry, not having the right food, that can really make thinking difficult. You know, we've all heard the words hungry. You really need to be fueled because, again, your survival brain is going, you need food. You need food. You don't need to do any of this thinking stuff right now. You need to find yourself some food, which can be related to an emotional response to not having food. And the environment. If the environment is threatening to you, if the environment is too hot, too cold, too noisy, too bright, all of those things are going to make your survival brain perceive a higher degree of threat, and it will be constantly sending those signals. So basically what's happening when this part of the brain is overactive, it's constantly sending signals which your executive functioning part of the brain is trying to control. So the more signals that are being sent, the more you have to use this resource to stop yourself reacting to it, and then you have very little left to do everyday tasks that are in front of you. Okay, next Mentimeter. This should just move on from the same slide that you had before. On to the next page. Oh, people have already been doing it. Brilliant. Let me make this bigger. So this time we should be talking about what improves executive function. I think the Mentimeter maybe said the same question twice, so sorry about that. Oh, what's semantic X therapy? That sounds interesting. I've not heard of that. Somatic. therapy. Rest, yeah, that's important. Safety. Exercise, yeah. I remember saying in a different training to this that if you're getting a flight response, your brain doesn't know the difference physiologically between you going for a jog and you running away from a threat. So if you can do some exercise, it always will be helpful. Good sleep, yeah, we'd all like that. Yeah, giving people time, having patience, all these things are important. Yeah, these are really, really good. I think, again, you've got most of the ones on my list. So let's go back to the other one. I think the words have stopped coming in now. Okay. So yeah, these are some things that can improve executive function. So the idea behind this list is that you cannot control how someone arrives. If you're a support worker, mental health worker, you can't control how they arrive. You can't control what they've eaten, how they've slept, whether they're rest sleeping. So these are things you can try and control. So you can try and help them feel the environment is safe, feel that you as their support worker are safe and trustworthy. Give them control where you can. Again, trying to give them power and autonomy and make sure their sensory needs are met. So we've talked before about movement. If you think about if you're sitting down for a support session and someone's brain is telling them, move, you need to move, you need to move, you need to move. If they're using some of their resources that they could be using listening to you, to stop themselves from moving, they're going to not be able to focus as well as they might do if you gave them a fidget toy or allowed them to pace or just made it sure they felt comfortable with moving. That can be the same with lots of sensory needs. For example, if there's a really bright light and you're sensitive to lights, you're constantly going to be receiving a signal that's going, there's a bright light, there's a bright light, there's a bright light. And that will take up space in your brain, whereas if the light was just off or low, then you wouldn't be getting that signal. Same thing for certain noises, or if you're too hot, too cold. So just making people as comfortable as you can within their own sensory profile will really help them to be able to focus on what you're saying and the activity that they need to complete in that setting. So there's also something called co-regulation, which basically is the idea that you can use your body and your actions to present safety to the other person. So if the other person is agitated and you respond in a calm way, then you can signal to their survival brain, I am safe, this is a safe environment. So you're trying through your body language, through your tone of voice, through your facial expression to convey to the other person safety and that this is a comfortable and safe place to be. It won't always work, but it's one tool that you can try and use in your practice. Calming exercises are also useful. The reasons these can be useful is, again, you're pulling that person's attention into their thinking brain by getting them to process social sensory information. And and you're then using that sensory information to signal safety to the survival brain. For example, 5-4-3-2-1 is quite a common technique used by a lot of practitioners, where you name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So it doesn't have to be exactly as prescriptive of that, but the idea is you're getting people to pay attention to their environment in a safe way, so you can then signal to the survival brain you are safe, and you can pull all of those resources into the thinking brain, which will help them to be able to focus on what you're saying after they've done those kind of exercises. The same's true if you're doing movement or fidget. Again, you're pulling people into that controlled movement part of the brain. It's always important to give people more time to process information and to wait for someone to respond. So if someone is taking a really long time, we all have a really strong urge to ask the question again, or worse, reframe the question and ask it in a different way. And the problem is that if someone was using a lot of resources to get to the answer to the first question, and you just interrupted that process, it's going to make it really hard for them to start again to get you the answer. And it's also going to irritate them or make them feel more agitated. So get comfortable sitting in the silence, wait for them to ask, to say if they didn't understand, or to say, can you repeat the question? Don't repeat the question because you think it's been long enough. Breaking tasks down. So if someone's got a problem with their executive function, they might struggle to keep all of the steps in a task in their brain at once. That's a working memory issue. So instead, give them one thing to do. Don't tell them how to do a whole thing. Tell them the first step. And then once they've completed the first step, tell them the next step. It's really simple, but often we don't think about doing it. For example, you can say, you need to fill in a homeless application. That's massive, and you've not broken it down at all. You've not told them where, when, what kind of information they may need to provide, what kind of ID they need to provide. So maybe the first step could be, we need to go down to the council house today. Like, what do you need? What support do you need in order for us to get there? Clear communication, again, avoiding sarcasm, avoiding idioms, avoiding slang that may not be understood. And then active listening, which means listening to the person, but also repeating back what you've heard to them so that they know you're listening, and so they can correct you if you've not understood something they've said. We said this right at the beginning, but it's worth repeating. It's important to check understanding. So don't say, do you understand? Say, can you summarize what we've talked about today? Or can you tell me what you understood from what I've said? Or you could say, can you tell me what the next steps are? What actions do you think I'm going to do? What actions are you going to do? And then from that, you should have a better sense of whether they've understood what you've gone through. And that is bang on time, the end of our slideshow. So we should have a good amount of time to answer any questions or have a discussion.
Oh, thank you, Amelia and Jeremy. That was, really interesting and informative. So thank you for delivering on that. We haven't got any questions in the Q&A box, which is often what happens. So we just give it a few minutes just for people to have the time just to type some questions into the Q&A box. Oh, they're coming in now. So that's good. Let me just read you the first question then. Okay, so the first question is asking, how would you combat challenging services, so local authority housing or adult care services, to understand the impact of executive function in individuals who may not have a diagnosis?
Do you want to take this one, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of related to the next question in a way. So all public services are responsible for upholding the public sector equality duty, which is a legal obligation they have to ensure that they are addressing barriers that people may be facing if they have a protected characteristic. People, as far as I'm aware, do not need a diagnosis for that duty to apply. So regardless of whether or not someone has a formal diagnosis or not, it should be enough to it should, again, and those challenges could be met by requesting a reasonable adjustment. I would make it very clear that you are requesting a reasonable adjustment. You're not just asking for the sake of asking, and then saying what sort of response you get. If there's still a refusal and you kind of throw out this stuff about the public sector equality duty, it may be worth, depending on how if it's preventing someone from accessing things altogether, what legal support might be available.
And I don't know if I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the disability inclusion doesn't require you to have a diagnosis. I think.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, that's correct.
Yeah, so
I think
you
it's
don't.
often not realized, but.
Yeah, most people don't realize that, but it doesn't rely on a diagnosis. So if you have strong enough suspicions that someone has a neurodivergence, whatever it may be, then you don't need, like, a diagnosis shouldn't limit their rights. Yes, it does. I just seen the chat. Yes, it does apply to schools as well. Schools, so you should get in touch with the SENDCO, and schools should make reasonable adjustments to support the educational needs of a child pending diagnosis. Because they know the wait list is long, they should make the adjustments.
Oh, thank you both. So the next question says, if you were in a meeting alongside a client with executive dysfunction and the person conducting the meeting is not taking this into account, despite you interjecting and reminding them that they need to be slow and clear and break things down, is there a requirement for them to do this to meet their needs that they can be gently, respectfully reminded of?
I mean, I would say yes. Yeah, you go, Jeremy.
So again, it's the public sector equality duty. I think it's also important to kind of hold in mind, though, that people may not be deliberately refusing to work in a way which is affirming of that person's needs. So just, yeah, try to be gentle with that. And some people might need lots of prompting and reminding, especially if they are very used to working in a particular way or following a particular kind of structure. It can be very difficult to kind of break out of that. So just be mindful of that as well. But if you're consistently having a negative experience with like a specific practitioner, most services as well will have, if someone is deliberately refusing, that's when I would really encourage you to go through complaints procedures.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And also, if you can have a meeting or a heads up with a professional beforehand to explain the person's support needs, that can also go a long way. You can, ahead of the meeting, say this person needs you to do X, Y, and Z. And then if you are supporting that person, make sure you have your tools in place so that you can summarize what was said for them in writing, if that's their preferred thing, and that you can set up prompts and reminders for that person, because often professionals or certain professionals won't think to do that, and it's those kind of supports that are really important when we're thinking about executive dysfunction.
Oh, thank you. We've got a couple more questions, but somebody's put a comment in the chat box, so I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this, that says there are often no clear referral pathways for assessment to show evidence of their difficulties. if they use substances especially, and often support services, for example, DWP, will only act with a diagnosis. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that point.
So it depends on what the question means. So for instance, if you are, say, at a PIP assessment or something like that, and you're saying someone is experiencing X, Y, and Z issues in their life, and they don't have a formal diagnosis, that often can be more challenging for them to. If you had two people, one that has a formal diagnosis that says the same sort of symptoms, someone without a formal diagnosis that says the same thing, I would be less confident in the person without a diagnosis receiving the same or similar score. But that's slightly different to request for reasonable adjustments, if that makes sense. So with that could be something like, oh, could we meet in a side room that's a bit more quiet, or things like that. And the DWP would still have an obligation to meet those reasonable adjustments regardless of diagnosis or not. But yes, there is a burden of proof that can come with things like establishing whether someone has a disability or whether someone, say, has priority need for housing, that oftentimes does require some degree of evidence. So if you're saying that, say, someone should be priority need because of a neurodevelopmental condition, often a local authority is going to want to see some evidence of that neurodevelopmental condition.
Yeah, I agree with Jeremy.
Oh, thank you, Jeremy. So the next question asks, how do or could you differentiate between difficult behaviours that are in that person's control?
You can.
Yeah, that's what I would say. You can't. I wouldn't try to. We didn't say this, but it's important to remember that we shouldn't try and diagnose anybody with anything. And the suggestions that we've made in this presentation should support people regardless of if they are neurodivergent or not. So yeah, don't try and play detective, don't try and diagnose somebody. If someone wants support, there are lots of online screening tools that you can find that will screen for things like autism and ADHD, or if you know someone's had a blow to the head or has lost consciousness or anything like that. And then the best route for adults is to go to the GP and ask for that formal diagnosis. But yeah, if you're working with somebody, I think often there is a lot of misconceptions. I think quite often people behave really badly, and that's really, really hard for professionals working with them every day to, keep having this sometimes quite abusive behavior towards them. And it's easier to blame the individual for that behavior and to believe that it's within their control. But if you just try and take a step back, it's the same as trauma-informed care that people probably have had, and that even if it is perceived as being in their control within the context of what's happened to them in their life, plus in the context of maybe a brain injury or maybe neurodivergence, the idea of control kind of becomes less black and white.
I think the thing that can be useful to think through sometimes is less about whether the person is or is not in control, but all behavior serves a function, whether it's maladaptive or not. And if someone is behaving in a way that is particularly challenging, or if they're doing something which is particularly destructive, rather than asking, are they fully in control of what they are doing, we should be asking, why are they doing that? And is there anything else we could be doing to better support them?
Yeah, I agree. And I know it's really hard not to take things personally as well, but try and remember that it's not about you usually.
Well, thank you. Someone has put a comment in the chat box in relation to that question, saying behaviour is a form of communication. If we repeatedly behave in a certain way, the behaviour needs unpicking to explore if there's an unmet need, which I think is what you just said, Jeremy, wasn't it?
Yeah, and usually if someone is aggressive, they feel unsafe in some way, even if they can't articulate that.
Thank you. So the next question asks, have you dealt with social services around how executive function and, inverted commas, life choices versus capacity be navigated?
I'll leave this one to Jeremy as well. This is something that is being thought about a lot in different circles about executive dysfunction and capacity.
Capacity can be a really tricky question because it's not a all or nothing thing. And in a lot of ways, rightfully so. I think that for there to be any kind of quite assertive action taken that makes decisions for people or removes choice from them, there needs to be pretty clear indications that that person lacks either completely lacks capacity in that area. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit. The other thing that can be really tricky is I've had a lot of situations where you consider someone's capacity, and everyone might actually come to an agreement that, well, first thing is often professionals don't agree, and it's very difficult. There's no, as far as I'm aware, formal process that if say my service says that we think someone lacks capacity, and Justine's working for a service that says we think this person has capacity, there becomes a roadblock where, well, what then? And that can be very, very difficult to press through. But even if there's an agreement about someone lacking capacity in a particular area, you have to do a best interest assessment with that person. And just because someone lacks capacity doesn't mean that it's in their best interest to force them to do a thing that they don't want. So for instance, the gentleman I was talking about earlier, I can't remember which pseudonym I used, the one that was at significant risk of death if he didn't go to hospital. We did a capacity assessment with him. We decided he actually probably lacked capacity. But then we had to ask the question, well, what do we do then if we think he lacks capacity? Are we going to force him to go to hospital? Are we going to medically sedate him? Are we going to literally chain him to a hospital bed to remove his ability, his choice over what he does? Are we going to force treatment on him? And if we do those things, is he ever going to access support ever again? And I think we all kind of thought about that one. Absolutely not. If we do this to this man, then there's no hope of us ever working constructively with him. So oftentimes there can be a pull to feel like we have to do something, but doing something isn't always the best thing for that person. Around the specific question that, I don't know, if someone's rough sleeping, it's just their lifestyle choice. That's just, I don't want to sound flippant, that's just stigma, and it ought to be challenged. I don't think these are never like addiction is not a lifestyle choice. Rough sleeping is not a lifestyle choice. There might be reasons that people are stuck in these cycles or that they struggle to move on from them, but that doesn't mean that it's a choice. By calling it a choice, you are removing your services, doing something about it, and that's why this happens. Is it's a form of deflection. So what do you do when services are deflecting in that kind of a way? It really depends.
Oh, thank you, Jeremy. Have you got anything to add to that, Amelia?
No, I think he absolutely covered it. And I think capacity, like Jeremy pointed out, is such a difficult thing, because even if you do decide someone doesn't have capacity, what does that mean? Yeah, so executive function is one piece of the puzzle, but only a small piece, really.
Thank you. So we've just got one more question here that asks, if you feel a person's executive dysfunction is affecting a person and trying to complete a mental capacity assessment, what supports, advice or things we should keep in mind when completing this? Practitioners, unfortunately, are usually restricted in time and resources, thinking about people with hoarding and substance misuse, etc.
I get what you mean. I think a lot of times you can have a strong suspicion that someone has unmet needs. So you call the kind of appropriate service. You get the psychiatrist or you get the social worker to come and assess whether someone has mental health needs or whether they have social care needs. They sit down with the person and they go, all right, can you tell me a bit about what you're going through? And then the person says, no. Can you tell me a bit about this? No, fuck off. How about this? No, fuck off. And it's very difficult in those situations for those professionals to then get a well-rounded, accurate picture of what those person's needs are. So then often that person doesn't necessarily get help. The thing, the idyllic situation would be if those services that are struggling to get the information they need are able to make contact with services in the community that might be able to plug some of the gaps in their knowledge. So we've done this before where, say, a social worker is trying to engage with someone around a social care assessment. The person is not necessarily being very forthcoming about their challenges, or maybe they're underplaying what their challenges are. We as professionals in the community can often go like, well, here's a whole case file of examples where this person has been extraordinarily vulnerable or where this issue has cropped up. And then the social workers and mental health professionals can use that evidence as part of their assessment. But ultimately, they'll want to have a reasonable enough idea of what the person's profile of needs are then. So as long as this isn't information that's from when they were like 8 years old and not relevant today, hopefully it should still be relevant now.
Oh, thank you, Jeremy. And that's the last of the questions that we've had. So if no one else has got anything else, then we'll just finish the session a bit earlier. So yeah, thank you, Amelia, Jeremy, for delivering today's session.
Just seeing one more question.
Oh. Okay. We just get that next question for you. So the next question asks, I was wondering whether, considering neurodivergence and the needs are not well understood and supported, whether there has been studies looking specifically looking at minoritized groups in this area and potentially added barriers to support due to compounded disadvantage and discrimination. I don't know if I read that very well. Did you understand what I was asking or what was being asked?
I think I understood, and I think there needs to be far more research into that, basically. I know as part of the neurodivergence workstream, we're trying to gain more insight into minoritized groups. But yeah, I think the same way that women have been less diagnosed than men, and the more we're understanding about neurodivergence, we know now it's not a male thing. I think the same thing has happened with whiteness, and white people are more likely to be diagnosed with autism. And again, it's not that white people are more likely to be autistic. It's that there is racial prejudice and bias that affect diagnoses. So I think it's definitely something that needs more research. And the stigma attached to so many things when we think about multiple disadvantage, that there's the barriers are massive.
Thank you. We'll close the session a bit earlier. So thanks, Amelia and Jeremy.